Okay. Welcome back. Did you have a good time? It was spring break. No? You guys aren't in the mood. We're going to have to cancel the exam because of the TA strike on Thursday. Yeah. Pathetic, right? For a second, I got you. All right. All right, calm down. We're having the exam on Thursday. Yeah, I know. Shh. Hope Crusher. That's our first. I like that. Can I put that on my business card? Crusher of dreams. All right, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to do another example of consumer surplus, one that I really like and that I think just makes us use our toolkit one more time. That one's not going to be on the exam, but I think it's nice to see yet another example of how this works, because do you think consumer and producer surplus are going to be featured prominently on the exam? Yes, right? So practice that. So I'll work through an example, and then I'll just take your questions. I will provide answers happily. I'll also hold office hours a little bit extra today, 2 to 5, if you want. And where am I holding them? 238 or something? I sent an email. Whatever that room is, I'll be there between 2 and 5 today. Come by, say hi. I have economics for you and bad jokes. All right, any questions about the exam before I get cracking here? No? Everything was in the email. Oh, and we've got an NCAA swimming champion in the room. Where are you? Not here. Too tired from the competition. All right. All right, let's go. I'm sorry, I had this Japan thing. I am toast. So I got there, and then these IPCC things, they go from like 8 in the morning until about 2 in the morning, and then they didn't get done on the last day, so they started at 8 in the morning, and they finished at 1 p.m. the next day. So it's pretty exhausting, but we've got a report. You may have seen it in the news, which is exciting. All right, so evaluating trade policies. Many of you are in this fabulous program, whether you know it or not, called International Area Studies teaching programs. You may know it as Political Economy Development Studies, PACS, or one of the Area Studies majors. And we care about trade. Trade is one of the most politically controversial issues, and economists often are very unpopular in this particular debate. So what I want to think about for a second here is trade policies and what different types of trade policies mean for the welfare of consumers and producers in a given country. Right? So the way it works usually is, in many, many countries, you have producers of certain goods, and then there is a world market for the same goods. So think of oil, think of wheat, think of soy, think of any sort of commodity that is traded globally, right? China produces a ton of wheat, but also imports a ton of wheat. So it depends on where you are, whether you're an importer or an exporter. So what I want you to think about here is a country that produces a certain commodity itself. It has domestic producers, and then there's a world market for that commodity as well, right? So what we're going to see is I'm going to draw a setting where over a certain range of production, the domestic producers will produce a certain amount of the good, and the rest of it will be imported. One way you could think about this is rice, for example. Do we grow rice in California? You should know the answer to that. Yes, we grow quite a bit of rice in California, a very water-intensive crop. We could talk about whether that's a smart idea or not, but that's for another day. Do we import a lot of rice into California? Yes, we do. A ton of high-quality rice from, essentially Asia, which is where most of the world's rice is grown. And that's also most of my research agenda. So if you ever want to come talk about rice, I know a lot about rice, and I also enjoy it quite a bit. So think of a tradable good produced domestically and abroad. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the welfare consequences of different types of policies. The first one is a ban trade, right? So no imports allowed, full protection. Then we're going to look at an import tariff next, which means if you want to sell your goods in my market, you're going to pay essentially a specific tax, right? So we're going to charge you, once the stuff lands in the US, a per unit dollar amount on anything you sell here. We do this for French wines and all kinds of other things, and then we'll compare it to an import quota. I don't know if we'll do the quota today because this freaks people out a lot, so I may not do that right before the exam because I don't want you panicked. All right, so let's look at what this looks like. I left my ruler at home today, so this will not be pleasant. Does anybody have one of those clear little rulers? I'll give you $1. Oh yeah, may I? Thank you. All right, so let's think about it as follows. So think of domestic producers. Again, sorry, on the y-axis here we have price. On the x-axis here we have quantity. So think of domestic producers who have an upward sloping supply curve which looks something like this. Okay, I'll call this SD, which is domestic supply. So think of these as California's rice farmers that have an upward sloping marginal cost curve aggregated across all producers. It gives rise to an upward sloping domestic supply curve. Rice is also sold on the world market at the following price. Right here, I'm going to call this PW. Okay, so domestic producers have an upward sloping supply curve, but you can buy the stuff from either domestic producers or you can buy it on the world market, and I'm going to assume that the world price is constant. What this means in econ terms is that this country essentially doesn't affect world price. So if this country buys a lot more rice on the world market, it doesn't affect the global price of rice. So you couldn't do this for oil, for example. If the US ramps up its oil consumption significantly, it actually affects world price. So what does the supply curve for rice look like? And let's also assume here that you can't differentiate rice grown in California from rice grown in Indonesia or anywhere like that. So what you always do is you always buy from the person who's willing to sell it to you cheapest, right? The lowest cost firms enter first. It's the same way as we thought about the cotton example that Kyle talked about. So as price rises, what happens is you buy from the lowest cost firm first. So at low prices, you buy from domestic producers. And then what happens at this point right here? If you want to buy more, are you going to buy from domestic producers, or are you going to switch to buying from the world market? You buy from the world market. You buy from the cheapest place. Here you go. So the supply curve that consumers in this country face is this one right here, where up to this point right here, we buy from domestic producers, and thereafter, we buy from sources abroad. So what does the equilibrium quantity look like? Well, in order to get equilibrium, we better draw a nice demand curve. The demand curve looks something like this here. This is a really nice ruler. I'm going to have to get myself one of these. So what you've got here is my supply curve is the green line right here. My demand curve is the downward sloping black line right here. So equilibrium, quantity, and price are determined where supply equals demand. So equilibrium quantity consumed in this particular market is where supply equals demand. So this here is Q star. And what's the equilibrium price in this market? PW, right? You guys are on top of it. You're well rested from your spring break. So equilibrium price is the world price. Equilibrium quantity is Q star. Do domestic producers sell rice at this price? They do, right? They sell quite a bit here up until this quantity right here. This here is, let's call this Q USA. How about that? Domestic, right? So this quantity right here is what domestic producers supply. And then what's the difference here? Well, this is total consumption. If this is domestic production, the difference between the two has to be imports, right? So the difference between Q star and Q USA right here, this difference is imports. That's pretty neat, right? Question.
You said that the domestic producers are selling at the equilibrium price at the price price. But isn't that just where the intersection is? Otherwise, like.
So domestic producers start selling until right here, right? So as soon as we get to world price, how much would you have to pay domestic producers to produce to get more output out of them? You'd have to pay them a higher price, right? So consumers are going to go, well, I'm not going to do that, right? I'm going to buy from the cheapest firm first. So they go to buying in the world market, right? So domestic producers just can't find a buyer in some sense for their wares at the price they would need in order to produce more, right? Because other producers outside are able to produce whatever wares, rice here in this example, more cheaply than they can. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. I thought you said that domestic producers are selling a great deal at the world price. And I see that chart they're not. They're selling mostly below the world price.
No. This is important, right? Each unit of rice sold here is sold at PW, right? So this is it's really important, right? So if you have a regular demand and supply picture, forget that this is trade here. If you just look at the competitive price right here, price and supply equals demand. If this were a regular supply and demand curve right here, this would be equilibrium price. This would be equilibrium quantity. The guy who sells the first unit right here, he doesn't sell it at his marginal cost. He sells it at equilibrium price. So everybody gets the same price. We will have a model soon called price discrimination, which is one of my favorite models. And I finally found a firm that's able to successfully first order price differentiate. So it's a new world. We'll talk about that. But here everybody gets the same price. Really important. Okay. So this much domestic production, this much import. So this is the free market outcome. This is if we leave firms alone, this is where they'll settle. PW is the equilibrium price. Q star is equilibrium quantity. Now some protectionist policy comes up and somebody says imports are evil, bad imports, bad imports, imports evil, right? We get that a lot. And then we're going to successfully ban all imports. So if you ban all imports, what's the only source of rice you have? Domestic producers, right? So do you have access to the world market? No, right? So the only source of supply is going to be the supply curve here. This is still demand. So what's equilibrium price going to be? Price is where supply equals demand. Domestic supply equals demand. So equilibrium quantity and price under a trade ban, which here I'm going to call Q double star, is this, and equilibrium price, P double star, is that. Now the question I'm going to ask, the question you will be asked once you start working in Washington, D.C., which is an exciting place to work. No can work there because 2 passports, but that's a different story. The point here is a trade ban good or is it bad? Right? Is society better off, the U.S. society better off under a trade ban, or is it actually worse off? Well, we can answer that question. How can we answer that question? We use our consumer producer surplus toolkit to figure out whether there is deadweight loss from this trade ban policy. So let's do exactly that. The pizza slices you will need are all very cool shaped in this example. A, B, C, D, and E right here, okay? A is this triangle on top, B, Massachusetts without Cape Cod, C, triangle, D, this triangle, E, that triangle. So let's do consumer surplus under free trade, producer surplus under free trade, welfare under free trade, and then see what happens under the trade ban and compare the two. All right, consumer surplus at Q star, this quantity right here, and my equilibrium price PW here is the area under demand. Can you guys see this pointer move on the screen? Oh, you can. How cool. I don't have to stand up there and wave. Okay, so what you're seeing here is this is demand, right? This here is equilibrium quantity. So it's the area above price, below demand, over the range of, I don't like this pointing, I like this much better. Demand, price, equilibrium quantity. So consumer surplus is this huge triangle A, B, D, and E. What's producer surplus? Now before we do producer surplus, I need to qualify something here. We don't care about foreign producers in this particular example, so we're going to ignore foreign producer surplus, right? Whatever producer surplus occurs to manufacturers abroad, in this particular example, we're going to ignore. You can account for that if you want, but here we're going to ignore it. We're only going to worry about our domestic producers, which is really in the flavor of a domestic welfare analysis. So domestic producer surplus is the area above supply, below price, over the range of production. So domestic producers produce Q double star. So domestic producer surplus area below price, over range of production, above supply is just going to be C. So welfare is going to be A plus B plus C plus D plus E. And again, when you do these tables, please don't write A-E here. If you write A-E, I will take off all your points because I think you wrote A minus E. So when you write summations, write A plus B plus C plus D plus E. Write out all your pizza slices. You can do it in Greek letters if you want. Now, under trade ban, what happens? The key to all of these problems is figuring out what the equilibrium price and quantity are. So equilibrium price here is P double star, equilibrium quantity Q double star. So what's consumer surplus? It's the area above price, below demand, over the range of consumption. It's just going to be A. What's domestic producer surplus? Area, you got it. It's the area above domestic supply, over the range of production, below price. So it's going to be B plus C. So total welfare here is A plus B plus C. So before, we had this thing that sort of looks like a face, right? Chin, nose, rest of face right here. So before, we had A, B, D, and E in consumer surplus, plus C. So this whole area right here. With the trade ban, what we've got in terms of welfare is A, B, and C. So deadweight loss is D and E, right? The difference. So D and E here is deadweight loss. Minus D, oops, minus E. What else do we notice here? Well, we have deadweight loss. So from a societal point of view, this is bad. Who loses big time here? consumers, right? We like our cheap 59-inch TV, or I don't know how big our TVs are, right? Consumers lose hugely. They use B, D, and E in terms of consumer surplus. Who gains? Domestic producers, big time, right? B here, that's a nice big chunk. So who lobbies for trade protection? Do you ever see consumer groups lobby for trade protection? No, right? I mean, Best Buy's not going to go out there and do that. But who likes trade protection? Domestic producers, right? And this model, I really like it. It's very, very simple. It's simple. Oops, big undo here. There we go. Minus B, minus D, minus E. These guys gain B, and if you add these two columns, these two rows up here, you're going to get D minus E. So consumers lose, domestic producers win, and society overall is worse off. So trade ban, not so good, right? Of course, there are other aspects of trade that we should worry about, right? The Nike scandal was broken by one of Berkeley's finest faculty members, for example. So there are all kinds of aspects to trade that are not in this model, right? There's very low protective policies against child labor in certain countries. There's very low safety standards in certain countries, and so on. So if we care about well-being of individuals in these other countries, just because the world price is lower doesn't necessarily mean this is a good thing from a global point of view. So these models leave out a lot of these other things that we should worry about. All right. Should we do a quota, or I'm going to do a tariff because that's easier. Okay, free trade versus tariff, and then I'll answer your question. So what's an alternate policy? So by banning trade, does the government here get any revenue? Does the trade ban get any dollars for Uncle Sam? Is that his name? I always forget. No. How do we call the U.S. government? I'm always forgetting. Whatever, tax revenue for the guy or lady who collects tax revenue. From a trade ban, does the government get any money? Say it loud. No, right? So no government revenue from a trade ban. So what does government like? Government likes to collect taxes because then it can use that money to redistribute it to, through government programs to produce the goods it needs to produce. So a tariff is another way of limiting trade. And what we're going to do here now is analyze what happens if you charge a tariff, which is just a specific tax on imports. So let's do exactly that. Price, quantity, same supply curve for domestic producers as before. This is the world price right here. Bless you. And this is the demand curve right here. So without a tariff, same thing as before. The supply curve is going to be domestic producers start producing first until we get to PW, and then we buy on the global market. So this here is my supply curve overall, right? I buy this much from domestic producers, and my imports are this much. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge tau dollars, which is Greek for tax, tau dollars per unit for each unit imported. So the price of each imported unit rises by exactly tau dollars, right? So if the French are able to import a bottle or sell a bottle of, I don't know, whatever your favorite French wine is, for $10, if you charge a $5 import tariff on top of that $10, that world price of French wine now, or the import price of French wine, has risen from $10 to $15. So the world price, or the price of imports, goes up by exactly the amount of the tariff. So this here now is S plus tau. So now what happens, right? The supply curve shifted up by the amount of the import tariff, much like when we did specific taxes, right? If you charge a specific tax, supply shifts up by whatever the specific tax rate is. So now, instead of paying $10 per bottle of French wine, the price is $15. So what does that do to domestic producers? Are they going to be able to sell some more of their wares? Right, they are. So we're going to be able to go up the supply curve further up here until we get to the new world price, and then it flattens out up here. So the new supply curve, let's use a new fancy color. We're going to buy from domestic producers until it's cheaper to buy on the world market, and the new supply curve is the red supply curve. So what you're doing essentially is you're keeping domestic producers in the market for longer, so the domestically produced quantity goes from this number to this number right here. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail in terms of what this means for equilibrium quantities. So before I charged the import tariff, we knew that the equilibrium quantity consumed was this, Q star, and domestic production, Q USA, was this quantity right here. Now, under the new supply curve right here, supply, red, equals demand up here, right? So my equilibrium quantity consumed goes down to where the new supply curve is equal to demand. So this now is Q double star. And domestic production, because it continues beyond the original world price, let's call this Q USA prime. So if you're thinking about what this means for imports, right, before the policy, this was imports before. And what happens to imports now? Excellent handwriting, Max. This reads imports right here, and this says before. So this was imports before, total consumption minus domestic production. So this much. Now total consumption shifted into Q double star, and domestic production shifted out to here. So imports after the tariff are simply this many units. So did you achieve your goal as a regulator?